America Looks Abroad, a series of broadcasts presented by the staff members of the Foreign Policy Association, a nonpartisan organization which offers accurate information on world affairs.
Mr. William T. Stone, Vice President of the Foreign Policy Association and Director of its Washington Bureau, will speak to you from the nation's capital. Mr. Stone.
The issue of aid to Britain was raised in a new and more urgent form last week. Up until recently, Great Britain has painted a relatively optimistic picture of its military position and economic condition. Reports from England have minimized the damage from Nazi air raids, and official spokesmen have voiced general satisfaction with the support coming from America. But about a week ago, the rose-colored glasses were suddenly removed. Lord Lothian, the British ambassador, returned to Washington last Monday with the blunt warning that England was nearing the end of its financial resources. Great Britain, he said, would soon need financial help, as well as more planes, munitions, and ships for the tough year ahead. In London, the British Minister of Shipping, Mr. Ronald Cross, told the House of Commons that Britain is losing ships at sea faster than she can replace them in her own yards, and that the government is looking to the United States to supplement the resources of the empire. Another member of Mr. Churchill's cabinet, Arthur Greenwood, admitted in Commons that factories and industrial plants had suffered from Germany's bombs, as well as churches and homes and hospitals. As these and other significant statements were allowed to pass the censorship, they presumably indicated a decision on the part of responsible British officials to admit the worst dangers confronting Great Britain without pulling any punches. To some Americans, this may appear to be deliberate propaganda. To others, it will seem a sensible decision to lay all the cards on the table for the American people to see and ponder. But whatever interpretation is made, the effect in Washington has been to confront both the administration and Congress with a number of difficult and fundamental questions which have been evaded for many months. Two practical questions must be asked at once before we can answer the fundamental issues which lie behind them. First, is Great Britain actually in need of immediate financial help? If she is, what steps should we take? If she is not, should the Johnson Act and the Neutrality Act, which forbid any loans or credits to Britain, be modified or repealed before the situation does become acute? Secondly, can the United States help meet Great Britain's shipping losses without sending American merchant ships into the war zone? And if not, can we take this step without coming close to direct participation in the war? Let's examine the financial question first. The exact resources that the British have for making their war purchases in this country are not known. We do know that at the beginning of the war, in August 1939, Great Britain and Canada had liquid assets of well over $4 billion available in this country. These included bank balances, gold, and American securities. That is, stocks and bonds which could be readily sold for dollars in the American market. In addition, they had other direct investments in factories and business enterprises in the United States amounting to nearly $1.5 billion. Altogether, it is estimated by the Federal Reserve Board that the assets of Britain and Canada were somewhere between $5.5 and $6 billion. How much of this huge sum has been used in making arms purchases in the United States? The answer is not entirely a matter of guesswork, although some of the essential information is not available. During the first 13 months of the war, or up until the end of October of this year, the British were able to pay for the largest part of their war purchases by selling goods to the United States. For example, during this period, our imports from the British Empire amounted to $1,296 million, while the British bought goods in this country valued at $1,878 million. This leaves a deficit for the entire British Empire amounting to about $582 million, which had to be paid for in some other way, by dipping into the cash balances by selling securities in this country, or by importing gold. Actually, all three of these methods were used. But the important point is that this deficit of just over $500 million is relatively small in relation to total British holdings. In other words, Britain's financial position would not seem to be critical if her adverse trade balance represented the entire amount of British expenditures in the United States. It would be a mistake, however, to assume that these trade figures tell the whole story. They don't. The present rate of British purchasing is running far above last year, and advance orders for war materials alone are said to be more than $2 billion. In addition, the British have also been advancing money to help expand American factories for war production, and perhaps using some of their American funds to help pay for Latin American trade. The actual sale of securities in the United States to pay these bills has been relatively small, not much more than $190 million up until the 1st of August. On the other hand, exceedingly large supplies of gold have been flowing into the United States through Great Britain and Canada, well over $3.5 billion worth during the first 13 months of the war. The Treasury doesn't tell us how much of this gold came directly from the British Empire, and presumably a good deal of it came from France, Holland, and other European countries occupied by Germany. It is hard to believe, however, that the British have actually used most of its own gold imports to pay for current purchases. In any case, it would seem probable that British war orders could be doubled or perhaps even trebled during the coming year without exhausting the financial resources now available to the empire. If this conclusion is sound, then, Great Britain does not face an acute financial crisis in the immediate future. Nevertheless, the British are preparing for what they know must be a long war. Winston Churchill recently spoke of the war continuing into 1943, and they're compelled to look as far ahead as they can. Our own policy, on the other hand, is hardly consistent. Congress repealed the arms embargo a year ago to permit Allied war purchases in this country, and President Roosevelt has pledged 50% of all American production to Britain. At the same time, we forbid loans to Great Britain under the Johnson Act and the Neutrality Law, and Congress is likely to resist pressure to repeal these laws in the near future. Last week, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee voted to take no action on this matter until the next session. It is doubtful, however, whether repeal would enable the British to float large public loans in the United States. The loans, or gifts if you choose, would have to be made by our government itself. And to some extent, this can be done without action of Congress. There are several practical possibilities. For example, our government could advance all the necessary funds to American factories for their plant expansion, thus making it unnecessary for the British to use their resources in this way. The Treasury could use its huge equalization fund to buy pounds sterling, or the Export-Import Bank might extend credits to Latin American countries to cover their trade with Great Britain. These don't offer a final answer, but they indicate that there are still a number of steps which might be taken short of outright repeal or giving away our war materials. Now, the second major question, British shipping needs, may prove even more critical, both to the British and ourselves. There is no doubt that Nazi submarines and its air warfare is taking a heavy toll. And if shipping losses continue at the present rate, an extremely critical situation may develop this winter. 3 possible steps have been discussed, unofficially at least, in Washington. The first proposal is to sell or transfer to the British Registry all available merchant ships and to begin new construction on a large scale in this country. The second proposal would extend our neutrality patrol further into the Atlantic in order to release British naval vessels for other duties. The third measure discussed would allow American ships to enter the war zone either by amending the Neutrality Act or by presidential order. Neither of the first 2 courses seems likely to meet the situation which may soon develop. We have already sold or transferred over 160 freight vessels to Great Britain and Canada. Most of those which are still available in this country are old and obsolete. The Maritime Commission has about 179 modern ships which are built or building under its construction program, and some of these might perhaps be transferred to the British flag. But this entire fleet would not offset Britain's war losses, and new American shipbuilding plants won't begin to turn out new vessels for some time to come. Moreover, Britain's tonnage shortage would not be relieved very much by extension of the neutrality patrol. The final course, to allow American ships to enter the war zone and carry American materials directly to Britain, is almost the only one which would promise immediate aid. Direct repeal of the shipping restrictions of the Neutrality Act would call for action by Congress, but the President, by executive order, could modify his war zone proclamations to allow American ships to enter the ports of Ireland, for example, which is still neutral. But either of these steps would have far-reaching consequences, for if we allow American merchant vessels to enter the war zone, there is sure to be an immediate demand for American naval convoys. Whether or not this would be a belligerent act, it would be almost certain to lead to reprisals and the loss of American ships and American lives. So the fundamental issues which lie behind these two practical questions go much deeper and involve the whole issue of our relation to the war. The policy of aid to Britain has been supported by an overwhelming majority of the American people. But up to the present time, different groups of Americans have supported the program for different reasons. Many believe that Britain is fighting our war, that it would be better for the United States to go to war itself than to face the kind of a world which would follow a Nazi victory. Many other Americans support aid to Britain because they believe it will gain time for our own defense program and will keep war away from the Western Hemisphere. But they believe that it would be suicidal for the United States to enter the war now. Both of these theories have their advocates in Washington, but many people in both groups have closed their eyes to some of the hard realities which confront us today. Whether we like it or not, the United States has already become a decisive factor in Britain's ability to continue the war. If Britain should be forced to come to terms with Germany, we would probably face a united Europe under Nazi control. It is even possible that Britain would be compelled to join a victorious Axis bloc, thus confronting us with a far more serious problem in Latin America. But the alternatives present equally hard realities. Some of those who privately believe that we should throw our full weight into the balance continue to say that we can turn the balance without direct military intervention. This is a dangerous assumption. It is difficult to believe that the United States can throw its weight into the balance by half measures alone. For in total war, half measures are not likely to be effective.
Mr. William T. Stone, Vice President of the Foreign Policy Association and Director of its Washington Bureau, was today's speaker in the America Looks Abroad series. If you would like a free copy of this talk, address your request to the Foreign Policy Association, 22 East 38th Street, New York, or in care of the station to which you are listening. The Foreign Policy Association is a nonpartisan organization open to all who are interested in American foreign policy. It offers accurate information on current world happenings. In the world of today, foreign affairs are your affairs. We invite you to tune in next Sunday to hear another speaker in the America Looks Abroad series. This is the National Broadcasting Company.